Hey guys, today I'm sharing a draw with me video of how I typically sketch using Procreate. I'll actually be working on a sketch that I've already started, so for this video it'll mostly just be me showing the outlining and the coloring process. So first thing, before I start sketching, I almost always find reference photos, usually through Instagram or Pinterest. I try to find photos that would collage well together, so usually I have a general concept or theme for the sketchbook page I'm working on. Themes vary, and it really just depends on what I'm feeling that day or anything that I've stumbled upon that I find interesting. My sketchbook pages tend to be more journal-like and personal, so the bulk of the sketch really is centered on the composition of the whole page and not just the one thing that I'm drawing, if that makes sense. Writing also becomes an element in my sketches, as you'll see towards the end of this video, and I really try treating sketching as a personal moment of reflection, so I sometimes spend a couple of hours or so just completing a whole page, kind of creating a story and a narrative, much like a journal. Sometimes I wish I had the ability to just sit down and concentrate on a piece, but honestly I'm the kind of person that gets bored of their own art very easily, especially when there is a lot of tedious and detail-oriented things that go into it. It takes me a long time to finish something unless I know I have a deadline, which, since I only make art on my free time really, that means the only quote-unquote deadlines that I have are the ones that I make for myself. And partly I think that explains a little bit about why my art style looked the way it is. I'd say my art style kind of centers around a lot on sketches looking unfinished or pieces that aren't as polished. I've always really been drawn more into the process of a piece rather than the outcome. And I've also only really ever done traditional art, so before I got into Procreate, I mainly used watercolors, graphite, and ink, and I feel like those art mediums really lend themselves to more quick and gesture-like art styles, if that makes any sense. But recently I have been very interested in developing my skills in background art, which obviously requires a certain amount of detail and accuracy. So these are the two things that I want to improve on as an artist. So translating my traditional art skills into digital art, the main brushes that I use are the HB pencil, the narration pencil, and the gouache brush. And I actually got this iPad not too long ago, maybe only 3 months ago, so I'm not an expert on how to customize brushes yet. I'm still learning the process of how everything works, but for now I'm mainly just using the preset brushes for the most part. For this sketch, I actually used the narration pencil to outline. I really like using a pencil brush rather than a pen brush to outline, especially on sketch-like things like this, because it's a lot softer and it feels more paper-like even if it's a digital drawing. One thing I want to explore a little bit more of though is creating a nicely textured watercolor brush. Since I've primarily worked with watercolors, I really want to be able to recreate that look even when I am creating digital art. But I'm not really a big fan of the preset watercolor brush on Procreate, and I know there's plenty of watercolor brushes that I can buy or download online, but I really want to try my hand at customizing just the right one for me. So for now, I think the closest thing that I've grown to like is the preset gouache brush, and the one I'm using in this sketch is actually the preset gouache brush, but I've tweaked the settings just a little bit. So since I bought this iPad, I actually have not touched my sketchbook or traditional art supplies at all. And I don't want to say that I've completely transitioned to digital art now, but drawing honestly has never been so easy. I will always really like making art traditionally, but Procreate honestly has changed the way I think and make art. And usually I'm super busy with work on the weekdays, so when I come home at night, after work, I'm tired and there's stuff to do around the house. It really becomes difficult to sit down and make art and take out my art stuff and mix colors and wait for the paint to dry and all that stuff. Even on the weekdays, on the free time that I have left, I find myself hesitating to use my traditional art supplies because it just takes so much effort. So ever since I got this iPad, I can draw while I'm in bed or even when I'm traveling for work. And I feel like I've actually been able to produce more art ever since using Procreate. It's not to say that I will never work with traditional art again, but I definitely feel that using this app has improved my skills and motivation to create. So back to the drawing. I usually like to keep the outline layers and the color layers separated. So typically I would have a couple of layers for the rough sketch and screen it back and a separate outline layer. That way you can move things around or scale things when you are not so set on how it looks like yet, or when you change your mind about something. Then after the outline layer, I have a few color layers. So the first color layer is really just a general wash that maps out the base. Then the next few layers would be shadows and shading and just overall building up the depth of the image. With colors, I don't have very many palettes put together on my Procreate yet, but I have one main palette and it mostly just has earth tones and warm colors, but I mostly just go from there. I actually used to draw a lot of portraits before and people and faces and all that stuff, but this past year, like I said, I've really been concentrating on more background art stuff, so I've concentrated a lot on landscape and nature, so that's why my palette is really more concentrated with earth tones. But in general, when I work on a sketchbook page like this, I just tend to keep a rough sketch layer peeking through from the color layers, just so that it adds a little bit of texture and depth to drawing, and it really kind of makes it look like it was done in paper. This sketch is actually the first sketch in a while that I've done a face of a person or a portrait drawing. I feel a little rusty, but I think that's why reference photos can be very handy. When I use reference photos, I really try not to copy everything exactly the way I see it. And I can link down below the reference photos that I used for this sketch. But for me, I think reference photos can actually make you a better artist so long as you use it as a guide and not something to replicate. In many ways, I think it can also help you figure out your own personal style. By simply studying and practicing basic forms, lighting, shadows through reference photos, I think your mind creates a sort of muscle memory on how to draw certain things. So when you are drawing on the fly without a reference, you inherently react to that drawing from your own memory of that object. Another really nice thing I have realized about digital art is the ability to redo and undo your work very, very easily. Working with watercolors, it really feels like you need to map out exactly where your values will be, and you need to know exactly how to control your water, and it becomes a very, very calculated way of coloring, and especially when you're waiting for layers to dry and all that stuff. So in many ways, I think watercolor is actually one of the most least forgiving mediums for artists. But with digital art, I can simply redo and undo with just a touch of a button, and it actually really feels liberating. I feel like I'm less afraid to make mistakes and be a little bit more experimental because I'm not worried about wasting materials or messing up. So I see the pros and cons with both digital and traditional art, but I think that the most important thing really is just being able to create and express yourself the best way that you can, regardless of what medium you use. So I typically finish up my sketches by just cleaning up the edges, touching up color, and adding a little bit more texture with a pencil brush. And I kind of just wanted to give it a look of color pencils on top of watercolor, so I actually went over the coloring with an HB pencil and just kind of sketched a little bit on top of the color just to add a little bit more texture. And that's about it. If you want to see more of my sketches like this, follow me on Instagram at MarcelCowArt. Thanks for watching.